We have Mr. Mo Levy from the Asper Foundation that wanted to greet our lecturer and you for the talk. Go ahead, Mo. Go for it, Mo.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's as you can see, if you can look behind me, it's kind of a really bright, beautiful, sunny day in Winnipeg. But don't be fooled by that. It's -5 out there right now. But for us, this is a tropical heat wave. A couple of weeks ago, as you probably all know, North America, at least the northern part of it, was under this intense -35 degrees. Believe it or not, we feel like we're in Florida. Everybody's running around in shorts. Anyways, to your lecture today, we're really pleased to see that you've got again another international lecturer coming to the Asper Center. Ashish Arora, Professor, welcome to the project. Welcome to the Asper Center for Entrepreneurship. As you know, the whole idea about entrepreneurial strategy is that everyone has great ideas. There's no doubt about many people have. It's the execution again that counts. And when Izzy Asper set up the Asper Center for Entrepreneurship, was not just to look at it academically, but also practically to see what can be done, in fact, to deliver great ideas and deliver them commercially. So your title today is quite intriguing. I wish I were there to join you all in this lecture. But suffice to say that we really believe in everything that the Asper Center does. I want to again thank Professor Miron Shai and for all his efforts that he's been doing and has literally given the Asper Center a new face. So again, thank you all. Enjoy your evening, and hopefully if there are any proceedings out of this, I would love to get a copy of it.
Everything is filmed.
Great lecture, everyone.
Everything is filmed, so you will be able to watch it. Everything is filmed.
Okay, terrific. So I would love to get a copy of it and share it with the Asper trustees. And so everyone have a great time in Jerusalem and have a great evening.
Thank you, Mo. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, good evening, guys. This will be, I think, the fourth, right, Ishai? The fourth Asper annual lecture. Actually, it's an initiative that our former dean, Ishai Yaffe, started. And every year we bring over a prominent speaker that is doing, renowned for his work on entrepreneurship, innovation, and so forth. And this year we are really happy to have Professor Ashish Arora with us. A few words for those of you who are not familiar with Ashish's bio. So Ashish received his PhD in economics from Stanford at 1992. Now I'm discussing your age, that's a problem. He then has been at Carnegie Mellon University till 2009, and then he joined the Fuqua School of Business at Duke University, where he currently serves as the Rex Adams Professor of Business Administration. Ashish's research essentially focuses on the economics of technological change and innovation, studies lots of knowledge-intensive industries such as software, biotech, chemicals, and as you will be able, I believe also to hear today, he has done a lot and still doing a lot on the management of innovation, intellectual property rights, licensing, patents, trading patents, licensing in corporations, between corporations, and Also something that is, of course, dear to our hearts, innovation-based entrepreneurship. Ashish is currently a departmental editor at Management Science, which is extremely prestigious in our field. He's also on the boards of Strategic Management Journal, Research Policy, and Industrial Corporate Change. He has been also the editor of Research Policy between 2008 and 2014. And he also consults many firms. Some of the renowned ones are Intel Capital and Tata Consulting. So without further ado, Ashish.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Am I loud enough for the back? Okay. So it's a great pleasure and it's a great honor to be here. Usually these are perfunctory sentences that every speaker says, and I have no credible way to tell you that I truly mean it. It's been a wonderful experience. It's my first trip to Israel, and it's been absolutely fascinating. And it's been a great visit to the university, and I've just had wonderful conversations. Okay, so today's talk, as Nihon mentioned, I've been interested in innovation for a long time. That's mostly what I've been doing. And I thought I would take this opportunity to try something out. So do essentially a 150-year history of this specific issue of how innovation's been happening in America, and to try to do it in about 35 minutes. And then we can talk. So this is sort of an experiment. And the reason for doing it is, so currently what I teach at Fuqua is a course in business, in entrepreneurship. That's core part of my teaching. And so as a part of doing that, and I've also been involved in some, in some entrepreneurial ventures. And what struck me was how every generation believes that this is the first time whatever they're seeing has happened. And in fact, part of it is to try to understand where we're going is to look back to see where we've come from. In a sense, in order to go forward, you have to know where you've come from, which of course is ironic given that I'm saying this in Jerusalem. But there it is. One more word, which is Karl Marx said in the 18th Brumaire that history repeats itself. The response to that was, no, it's historians who repeat themselves, not history. And I'm somewhere in between. I don't think history ever quite repeats itself, but it sometimes rhymes. And I hope you'll see the rhyme in the talk. At least that's the objective. So we'll start in the middle. This is neither the beginning nor the end. It's neither the... I realize this is a lecture, but I'm going to break with protocol. What's common here? What unites all these symbols, all these logos?
American films.
They're all American firms, that's true. That's because my talk is only about American innovation. So that part's true. Something else? Many of them are gone, but at yet point... Sorry? Exactly. Yeah. These were, if you like, if we were doing this talk, I don't know, 1970, these would be the icons. These would be the innovating companies, right? The giants. Bell Lab, DuPont, Kodak, Hewlett-Packard, Xerox, US Steel, Western, we could go through. GE, another big one. And, no, G is right there.
No, GM.
Oh, GM, yeah, okay, that's true. There's only so much I could do in terms of hunting down logos, and I wasn't quite sure. Anyhow, the point was much of thinking in economics of innovation is still centered around the mental models that were developed when this was the dominant way of organizing innovative activity. Roughly sometime between starting 1930s and ending sometime in the 1980s. So if you think about when these guys reigned, they started sometime from there. So the question is, what happened? Why did, if you think about the model, what was interesting about was not only were these companies the dominant innovators, they largely managed this process themselves. So they all had, the way they got new products into the market was they had significant research investments, they had significant research organizations, they employed scientists, and the model was those scientists and those researchers would come up with new ideas that would then go into the funnel through the development organizations of these companies, and eventually at the other end would come new products. The prototypical example of this would be DuPont, who got nylon. That was the first really big one that came through their internal research. And that made them billions of dollars, even back in the day. And then they spent the next 30 years trying to get lightning to strike again. I'm overdrawing this a bit, but that's roughly what was going on, till they finally said, no, okay, this is not working, right? And in different ways, you know, each company has a different story, but in some ways, to some extent, this is a generalization, but to some extent, this is what was common. This model was what was common to these companies. Okay, so just to repeat, the way you go to get growth is through new products, innovative new products. The way you're going to get those products is you're going to essentially invent them yourself. And the new ideas are going to be, the people who are going to come up with those new ideas are going to be your paid employees, your corporate research scientists. And that was the model. Okay? Skipping ahead. So I had a student, a PhD student, who did this for me. And he found out, whoops, if I can go back, there you go. He found out all the different pieces of technology that went into Google Glass. At the time we did this, we weren't quite sure how successful Google Glass would be. As it turned out, it's not been terribly successful commercially. But that's not important. What's important is where this is coming from. Right? And by the way, you'll recognize this guy. This is DeepMind, the machine learning, artificial intelligence guy. He's also part of this, at least this initial effort. And so this model, if you like.
What is the Google Glass?
Oh, Google Glass. All right, Google Glass is these new glasses that are supposed to take video and tell you about what was going to happen and who this person was, so I would know your name. And you know, that sort of stuff. If I had Google Glass, it would instantly tell me. And this, Hank Chesbrough and other people, this has been called the open innovation model. And the idea is it's much more free-flowing. And I'll say more on this. But at these two extremes, right? There was this closed, siloed, each firm was its own stovepipe, and this very open things, ideas and technology and dollars are flowing in and out at different stages. And so that's kind of the theme. I'm going to argue, we've seen this before. I'm going to say a little bit about why it changed then, why we moved from kind of a proto-open model of innovation to a closed, siloed model. And then how things have changed since, and what are some of the concomitants, what are some of the other factors that have accompanied these changes. And I have one slide about, with words on it, where we can speculate about the present and which way we might be going and what else has to happen. And perhaps that'd be a great thing to discuss over in the Q&A, in the discussion. So this is the railroad. In the 1860s and 1870s, along with agricultural machinery, technologically most sophisticated enterprises in the world were these guys. All right, just think about it. You have locomotives, you've got metallurgy because you've got steel rails to bear the weight, you've got all kinds of interesting things. These guys, the railroads, did no inventing of their own. There's lots of invention and innovation here in this system, none of it coming from the company. Some of it was coming from people employed by the company, but not for the purposes of inventing. Those were workmen, repairmen, other people, tinkerers, who were innovating and providing these innovations to the railroads, who then incorporated it. That was the business model. Right? You say, okay, well, the railroads. Intense amount of patenting going on at this time. So I'll show you in a minute, but one of the key things here was how do you, when you've got a locomotive going, when you've got a train going, how do you stop it? So the braking system was crucial. And I spent 17 years in Pittsburgh. A name associated with Pittsburgh, in addition to US Steel, which provided the rails, is Westinghouse. And the way Westinghouse made his money was he invented the braking system for railroads. And instead of just licensing the technology to the railway companies, they were perfectly willing to license. He said, no, I'm going to build the system for you, you got to buy it from me. I'm not going to license the technology. It's not just a product, I'm going to build a company out of this, and you're going to buy my product. And they hated it. And along with Westinghouse, then there were at least two other people with competing patents on a system for braking the technology. And there was patent litigation. And some of these patents guys were called trolls. They were not called trolls, they were called sharks. But they were. And Justice Learned Hand, I believe, had a dictum in which rendered judgment, and the words he was using could be used to describe trolls. The patent troll system, I'm sure you guys have been hearing about the patent troll problems in America. This happened in the 1870s. These are some of the names you've seen. Right? So we don't have to talk about all of them. But the point here was, if you look at the American system, say from 1850 to 1900, this periodization in history is always problematic. So don't hold me to, say, till 1914, roughly speaking. This was the time of independent innovators, independent inventors, connecting to the people who would get these products out into the market in a variety of ways. So Ken Sokolov and Naomi Lamoureux, who were, and Steve Usselman, who did the railroad stuff. So this chart is from Ken Sokolov and Naomi Lamoureux, and what it shows is the percentage of patents which are granted, which are then reassigned. So you could think of these are patents that have been traded away, sold, right? This is a way in which an independent inventor would transfer his right, they're almost always his, rights to the ultimate commercializing company. That's the US, that is Great Britain. So the US even then was special. And so what this tells you, and by the way, this number for Britain includes both assignments, outright sales, as well as licenses. For the US, it's only outright sales. And two things. One, how high this number is, 80% for the US. And second, there's this, if you kind of squint at this, there is this sort of downward drift. And what that downward drift means, a larger fraction, as you get towards the end of the 19th century, a larger fraction of patents are now being produced by people who will use those patents themselves. Essentially, either inventors working for themselves who are going to start their own companies like Westinghouse, or more likely invention for hire, people working whose job it was to invent new things. So you can already see things are changing. It changes at different rates. And just a quick nod to VC, if you read the history of these independent inventors, the way they get financed, you have what we would call them local angels. Right? And this is way back in the 1870s and 1880s. You can find them in America and American cities. Local merchants, local businessmen who have an appetite for risk and who can see the potential of these new technologies, sometimes wisely, sometimes foolishly, and who are willing to back these independent inventors. So we think VC was invented in the Valley. It's already there. Now, tradable securities and all that kind of good stuff that the finance folks will, maybe we didn't have all of that. But in some sense, that didn't seem to have stopped. I mean, if you think about it, it didn't seem to stop this very high rate of trade in patenting and the assignment of patents. So how did this system change? Why do we see this downward drift? Well, as the companies become bigger and they start looking ahead, then the question is, where is growth going to come from? Initially, growth is going to come from the inventions are going to come from the outside. And so one problem that arises is, how do I know what I'm buying? Right? So somebody comes to you and says, please buy this patent. Alexander Graham Bell offered his patent to the telegraph company for the telephone. Right? There's a famous story about they asked for 10,000 or 100,000. And so then if you're a potential buyer, if you're a company incumbent in this market, how do you decide what to buy? Right. So you have to have some internal expertise. The second reason, actually the primary reason they developed an internal research department initially was because of the material, to do quality control on the material. So Andrew Carnegie hired Frick. You might have heard of the Frick Museum or Frick Park. Frick was a chemist, and his job was to analyze the ore and the coal that was being sold to see whether it was appropriate, it was fit. That was the reason Frick was hired. So first to do quality control, but for my story, the more interesting part of the story is to buy outside technology. This is a quote from T.D. Lockwood, who was the head of what was called the patent department at AT&T, or the American telephone company. Now, of course, they were not producing patents. The job of the patent department was to acquire patents, to buy patents. And so today this would be the head of R&D. This is the analog of the head of the R&D function. And he says, it is not now, and it will never pay commercially to have a research, to employ people to do research. This is the guy who was running R&D for the company that would eventually have Bell Labs. This was how research started at what would then become Bell Labs. This is the precursor to Bell Labs. And so the reason there is a patent department is to examine patents or inventions submitted by the public and those forwarded by the company's employees. The other problem, so once you get beyond this, and this is Willis Whitney, who started GE Research. And Whitney had no intention of starting a research department. But GE had very specific problems. So one of the problems was, how do we keep the filament, the bulb? GE's big thing was the bulb. How do we keep that going? How do we have lights? So a big customer for them was the railroads again. And they needed lights that would be red and green, so you could do the signaling. It would be visible over long distance, would not, the glass would not go away, when it snowed or it was hot or something. So they needed to understand the properties. What was fine? So you need to understand this. Contract it. If you were 1910 America, to whom would you contract this? American universities were, to put it politely, crap. Right? It was very difficult to get. There were smart people there, but it was very difficult to have this kind of institutional. So he hired Langmuir, who eventually went on to win a Nobel Prize in physics. But it was a very specific, there were very tangible problems that they needed solved that they would have liked to have solved in other ways. Because managing a research operation inside a for-profit company is another management challenge, is a big problem. I'll come back to that eventually. But if they could have, they would not have. Now this is a different case. AT&T has a special history because of the antitrust. So things are a little bit more complicated here. But the beginning of corporate research, if you like, after World War I, there's a constellation of factors. You have bad universities, you have great opportunities. Right? The commercial application of science is now becoming visible. It's becoming visible in electricity. It's becoming visible in the chemical technologies, the two big ones, if you think about GE. So these are the opportunity. And antitrust has gone in and out. So if you think about DuPont, the reason DuPont got into research was they could not think of any other way to grow. So in 1911, DuPont had already existed for 100 years. And the feds, the Justice Department, essentially walked in. They had a big monopoly on smokeless powder. They were the biggest supplier to the US Armed Forces. And the feds went in and broke them up into 3 companies. That was what antitrust used to look like back in the day. So they broke them up into Atlas, Hercules, and DuPont. Now when something like that happens to you, right, you have 2 choices. You can say, okay, I'm going to be content with where I am, or I'm going to find new ways to grow. And the new ways that the antitrust authorities would let you would be through new products. There it would be okay. You could not try to do it with older products, but with new products you'd be fine. So initially the new products, DuPont was French, so they had French connections, so they got cellophane from France. But at some point, this wasn't enough. And they were broad enough that they could say, okay, let's try this. Let's try polymers. The new science of polymers was happening at that time. Let's see somebody who knows about polymers. Let's see if we can get them. That's how they got Carothers to do fundamental research in polymers. As a part of his research, he discovered nylon. And then promptly, after filing the patent, promptly went on to do other things. He had no interest in developing nylon further. That was okay. So if you think about how this process happens, right? You have this opportunity, a big booming market. You can see how technology can be used. World War I has also helped you see that. Antitrust won't let you grow, so the growth has to happen through innovation. And your university, if you don't do it, nobody else will. Roughly, that's what the weak university means. You don't have the NSF, you don't have the NIH, and the university system is very poorly developed in terms of the research function. And of course, so initially you start, and then these things have a momentum of their own, right? So in order for DuPont to get people who were interested and willing to do work in polymers, they had to organizationally separate them. So the research department at DuPont was located in a building that was referred to in the company as Purity Hall, because they were doing pure research, unsullied by commercial motives. Imagine trying to manage such an organization. Right? It's like having a university inside a for-profit company. It's an inherently unstable position. But for a while it goes, right? And there's a huge push after World War II. And so some of you may know this was a famous memo written by Vannevar Bush called Science, the Endless Frontier, which led shortly thereafter to the formation of the National Science Foundation. There was a big public policy push to strengthen universities. And well, this is obvious. This is the ENIAC computer. These are all the technologies that either come out of World War II or whose value is proven by World War II. That's Fleming with penicillin. That's radar. One could put many, many more here. So once again, you've got this process where suddenly there's this great belief that you can make a lot of money by investing in science. And it's both privately good and it's publicly good. So the public and private kind of narratives are aligned. They're pushing in the same direction. And here are just some of the people who worked for companies that got Nobel Prizes. Right? So, put it differently, from World War II, and say the process starts in 1930s, and you know, in different technologies it takes more time. But certainly in the 1950s and 60s, this was standard corporate strategy. To grow, you're going to have a research department, you're going to hire a bunch of really smart scientists, they're going to invent stuff for you, you will develop it, sell it, make lots of money. That's the kind of broad strategy that lies behind all of this. And again, there are, for each particular company, you know, there are some nuances, but it's not important for the purpose right now. And of course, for the most part, this didn't work. These investments did not pay. There were very few new nylons coming out. It worked the longest, I would say, for the pharmaceutical industry. But my reading of the situation there is that even they are tiring of it, that they are trying to find new ways. They really don't want to be in the research business. That's one way to think about it.
Why? Because it was public good that they produced?
Well, it was always a public good. But you're anticipating. I'll tell you in a minute if you just hold on. So what's the evidence? For this part of the story, there's more statistics. So you'll see fewer photographs and more graphs. This is from the National Science Foundation, Science and Engineering Indicators. This is the share of privately funded R&D in the US by firm size. So as late as 1984, 60% of the R&D was private R&D was paid for by firms with 25,000 or more employees, big firms. Okay? By 2005, which was the last time I did this, that share has gone down to 40%. So it's still big, but it's gone from 60 points to 40 points. And pretty much everybody else, but especially the small firms, now account for a bigger chunk. Okay? This one here, it's a really neat piece of statistics. This is a paper in Research Policy. So there's this magazine called R&D 100. Sorry, there's this magazine called R&D, and they give awards for the 100 best inventions. And these are supposed to be based on technical grounds, right? So it's not about commercial success. And so 1971, so let's take this number, 38 of those went to people working for Fortune 500 firms. In 2006, 2 went to people working for Fortune 500 firms. So whichever way you look at it, big firms are much less in the business of coming up with cool new stuff. That's the point of these two graphs. If you look at the thing I really care about for now is research, which is the front end of the funnel. This is again NSF data. This is the share of basic and applied research in total research only for privately funded research. So this is the stuff that not the government but the private sector is doing. This is the share of research in R&D. That's gone from about a high of about 32% to about 25%. That's on the input side. A different way to look at it, and these are data that with a colleague we've published. It's an NBR paper. You can look at the share of R&D performing firms, publicly listed R&D performing firms in the US, that have published an article in a hard science journal in the Web of Science. That's the blue line. So maybe they're just not technical. No, these are the share that have patented. So firms are still in the innovation business because they are patenting. They're just not in the invention business quite as much. If you think of the front end of the creation of new knowledge, that would lead to it. Now, why is that, you ask? Well, one reason is because, I don't have the slide here, but we've just done this research, we've just finished this paper, is because their ability to use their own research actually has been pretty low. They have not been very successful at making use of their own research. The poster child for that is Xerox PARC. Right? We've all heard of stories of all the cool stuff that came out of the Palo Alto Research Center that Xerox could not use. Right? They made some money of it, but they couldn't use it. And so they said, well, it doesn't, this was cool stuff, but we should not be in the business of managing that activity. Okay, so so it's in this sense, if this went to 0, and if I were a strict Marxist, I would say history is repeating itself. One way to think about this is eventually large companies will completely get out of the research business. I think that's overstated. But certainly they've withdrawn from the research. When I say research business, the business of managing research activity inside by themselves. What is going to replace it is less clear. This is why we have to speculate about the future. There's lots of activities. For those of you who've been reading about Google, Google's been kind of like a fruit fly, right? They had Google Labs, which they shut down. Then there's Google X. And they have very interesting sort of ways of managing that whole activity. I'm not an expert, and if somebody knows more about how Google is actually doing, it'd be interesting. The dinosaur here is Microsoft, in the sense that Microsoft, until recently, it still has in that sense, a large-scale research operation. If you go and see, they're really super smart people working, publishing papers, doing stuff with them. And it's an interesting thing if you were a shareholder. My pension funds, I'm sure, are invested in Microsoft. What am I getting for that? So Microsoft, it's a good thing, it's a great thing for America that they're doing it. But me, what am I getting for that? That's the question. If you look at the, what are those called? Those talks that they have with the earning calls, right? Where the CEO goes and talks to investors. You see that question being asked of Ballmer. It was never asked of Bill Gates, but you see that question being asked of Ballmer. And Ballmer is constantly defensive about what Microsoft is getting out of research. Right? They had some spectacular successes, but they were spending about $1 billion a year on that. And you can say, well, am I getting the return on that? That's kind of the question. The problem is we know how to make the old model, we know how the old model works. The stovepipe model. How this new open innovation stuff works is less clear. Let me say how am I doing on time? No, but what is?
It's now 7:20.
How much time do I have?
As much as you want.
No, that's never a good thing. I need a deadline. All right, so I'll try to be quick. So what else is going on along with that? Well, I showed you that chart with patent assignments. In order for this new system to work, in order for companies to not do the research but still get access to the fruits of research, you need a market to connect these two. You need ways for ideas, for patents, for technology, for people, firms even, to be bought and sold, to be exchanged in the marketplace. Through a variety of, these are things that we study in the strategy area, at least in the innovation, right? Alliances, joint ventures, M&A, this kind of stuff. So just so you know, I'm not blowing smoke. This is Bureau of Economic Analysis released a really interesting figures. Let me cut to the bottom line. In 2002, the licensing of intellectual property, patents, that kind of stuff, not Mickey Mouse's image, so not copyright, not software, not sort of brand licensing, it's just technology licensing, was $66.6 billion. This is the Bureau of Economic Analysis. This is 2002. We've used other ways to get it. The order of magnitude seems right. Very roughly, it's about a quarter of civilian R&D. Right? So
Outright payments?
these are reported as income by companies in their, when they report to the IRS. That's the source. Now, this is on the stock of all the intellectual property that's being, so this is not the flow of, you could do a similar analysis looking at the flow of patents being sold. But this one's been tracked. A different metric here is the percentage of R&D that's contracted out, that's given to somebody else to do. Again, NSF numbers, they've gone from about 4%. This is total to about 7.5%. In manufacturing, it's about 8%. Circa 2007. I haven't tracked it since then. Right? This is collaboration. The point here is the way you get these things to work is through a variety of different mechanisms: licensing, patent sales, collaboration, contract R&D, a whole different set of and I've not even got here outright acquisitions of companies, right? Where we did a survey recently for 2009, and this is not just high tech. This is a representative sample of US manufacturing. And we asked, this is based on the community innovation survey that many European countries have done. I don't know if there's a similar survey for Israel. Okay. So the number here is 20% of the companies said, yes, we have introduced a new product. The question we asked them is, have you introduced a new product into the market in the last 3 years? And new being not just new to you, but new to the market. 20% said yes. And then we asked them, where did you get it from? So if this was new, where did you get it from? And roughly half said, we got it from outside, somebody else. And how did you get it, or who was the outside person? Typically, you would think of this as business partners from my value chain. So half of it comes from my value chain, and about a third comes from people that I don't have ongoing business relationships with. This is all manufacturing, not just high tech. So many different ways of slicing that. That, for the economists among you, is Adam Smith. And if you read The Wealth of Nations, book 1, it says what makes people, why are some countries richer? It's the extent of the market. No, it's the division of labor that makes it more productive. What allows a division of labor? What limits a division of labor? It's the extent of the market. I've been talking about a division of labor in the innovation process. Somebody else does the inventing, somebody else does the development and commercialization. That's a standard Smithian division of labor. Why did we have it then? What limits it now? Well, that's a whole story, but in order for there to be a division of labor, there has to be a market. Right? That's the market I was showing you right here. And so the next question is, okay, and what do we need for this market? We need intellectual property rights. We need somebody else to step in to do some of the heavy lifting, the inventing, the cool stuff. And we need these institutions, these intermediaries, to make the market work, to match buyers and sellers. So one quick reason why companies are withdrawing from research is because universities are happy to do it for them, either for free, or even if you have to pay them, it's a more efficient place to do it. And universities are themselves, to use the language of strategy, moving further down the value chain. They're going from just being the idea people to now filing IP and trying to get into the commercialization. Jon told me that part of the Asper Center's mission is to get faculty all the way down the value chain into actually entering the commercial. I'm not sure I think about that. Adam Smith certainly wouldn't have approved, but that's neither here nor there. He's not funding your foundation, so it's okay. Certainly, around the time, around 1984, these are well-known things. There's been a major spurt in patenting, major reforms in patent rights. These are the specialists. These are the guys who do R&D for you. These are for-profit companies that do contract R&D. Not only do they account, the R&D intensity really high. If you look at company-financed R&D, their own investments, these are very high. We've all seen versions of these. Some of these guys are intermediaries. Some of these guys, if you don't like them, you'll call them trolls. Doesn't matter. This is what you have when you've got this open innovation kind of ecosystem. And these guys, this is venture capital. I just got it off this morning because I realized I had a whole slide deck and nothing on venture capital, so I hurriedly went out and said, okay, yeah, so there's venture capital too. Personally, I'm a skeptic on how much VC we need, but it's certainly an important part of this. My last slide. Okay. So what does this mean? Well, I'm in a strategy department, so I'm going to start with corporate strategy. Even if, before this I was in a public policy department, so I would have done policy before, but let me start with strategy. Even if you don't care at all about the public good, purely in terms of strategy, these trends pose strategic challenges. The most elemental one. How are you going to, if you're the CEO or you're the person in charge of that little planning unit inside the CEO's office, how do you plan for growth? Right? In the old model, maybe we didn't do it well, but we knew how we do it. You want more growth, you increase spending at the front end. Right? You hire more inventors. A firm is ultimately a mechanism for allocating capital internally. The problem now is you're not in the research business, you're not in the inventing business, so how are you going to plan for growth? How do you manage that process? It's all very well to say there's a market out there, but how do you manage that process? How do you make sure that you will be able to access the inventions you need when you need them? Who in the company will be responsible for that? Typically you have business development, that's a function inside the company that's supposed to do that. But is that well run? Do you know how to manage that function? We're talking about corporate venture capital. There's mixed stories on that. The point here is not to pass judgment, but to say this, if you want to think about big strategic challenges inside companies, real challenges, this is one of them. If you're interested about policy, this is where when I do talks like this, I get the most questions. What should we do? If when I do this in America, the first question is: are we being America, losing our technical lead? Are we losing our lead? Are we losing our advantage? Should we do something? The honest answer is I don't know, because on the one hand, I believe that the system that was there after World War II was not a very efficient way to do things. Managing research where you have quarterly reporting to investors is a horrible environment in which to manage long-term research. And you can waste money one of two ways, right? It's not clear which is the worst way to waste money. But you certainly waste money trying to manage it, right? Either you'll compress it down, you'll kill research, or you let those guys do crazy things. So what should we do? Well, we should let people in the Smithian tradition, let the more efficient entity specialize in doing the things that they're doing. But it's easy to say that, right? In a policy perspective, how will that work? Right, what should we do? So the typical answers that get trotted out are patents and increased funding for universities. Those are the two big things that get trotted out. There may be reasonable prescriptions, I don't know. Certainly inside a university, I think increasing funding for universities is a great idea. But whether it's good public policy, I don't know. The other thing that comes out is this: encourage universities to get into the invention business, to actually get into the business of doing startups. You think about it, the way we are structured and the way we are governed as universities, it's not clear I want anybody here, investing university capital and saying, okay, this startup but not that startup. My own university has just started a fund. Duke has started a fund to invest in Duke startups. I think it's the worst idea possible. But, sorry?
People universities is worse.
Okay, I'll be happy to arm wrestle you on that one. Who has the worst idea? But these are typical public policy responses in response to this fact that we have now a new system for doing it. If you have startups, if you're doing startups, this is a great time. You have opportunities. But as companies withdraw from research, I can easily see a challenge, which is when the buyer stops being an informed buyer, if they stop doing research, they are a less informed buyer, and then they want more assurances. So then they want you to see more to prove more and more things about your venture before they'll buy you or before they'll give you a good valuation. So pharmaceutical companies today, if you're a biotech startup and you have animal data, forget about it. They want to see human data because they've been burnt so often. Well, now, from your perspective as a startup, this is a big problem because you have to be in business a lot longer to get human data. It's not enough to have the molecule. You have to have, or the target, the lead compound. You have to optimize it, all this kind of stuff, regulatory affairs. There's a lot more value-destroying investments you have to make before somebody will buy you out. So there is this kind of tension here. I'm done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let me try to suggest an explanation for this phenomenon.
Okay.
Suppose that engaging in innovation is a negative expected return.
Right.
And then it is similar to the public buying lottery tickets, state lottery tickets, which are negative expected return. So the companies realized that. And now they shifted the onus, the risk on individual or small organization investors who engage in innovation, saying, you take the risk, I'll buy only the successful ones.
Right.
If you are ready to take the risk, you are ready to take a mortgage on your apartment, and then you can lose it. So this increases, the expected return for the companies not doing the research.
Yeah.
They just select the better ones. This reminds me of a strategy by Coca-Cola that I read, many years ago, that they do not invent new drinks. They just look at small, successful innovators in this
right.
drink business, and then they imitate.
Right.
Only the successful ones.
Yeah. Look, so two things. One, research, particularly basic research as a function of our total R&D, is a relatively small percentage. It's no more than 10%. So you still have a lot of risk on the D side. I mean, at least potentially in terms of the investment. Second, when I hear this, my instinct, from us is who is better equipped to bear the risk, individuals or large corporations? So the efficient risk allocation should be with the large corporation, because the individual, risk is.
They are doing bad decisions, like buying a state lottery ticket.
You mean
return the individuals. To buy
I
a
see.
state lottery ticket is a negative expected return.
Yeah.
You get about 60% on your money on average.
So it could be privately negative. It cannot be socially negative, right? The last 250 years in human existence are marked by the fact, in Kuznetsov's word, is the systematic application of science to economic ends.
But do we know how many lost their money trying to invent something and
yeah, but in the aggregate it must be positive. So this is an article of faith. Socially it's a good bet. There's no question there.
I refer to the book by Linda Weiss, America Inc. ? And the whole picture is missing of the national security contribution, i.e. the government.
You mean in this?
In this talk, you're
Yes.
absolutely missing all the part of the government, which by fact was the largest one. Anyway.
Well, so to the extent that big upsurge in universities, the government funding things, yeah.
Google was funded by the government.
Sorry?
Google was funded by the government.
Yeah, fair enough. So in 150, if you look at 150 years, yeah, the government national security, you're absolutely right. That's a part of the thing. I don't think it's the most interesting part of the story, because I'm convinced that it's not efficient for big companies to be in the business of research. So the government may have accelerated that process or have delayed that process, but this is the idea.
In the recent decade, 2-3 decades, there's a boom of startups, innovation from entrepreneurs. Do you think this is a result of this, epiphany that companies identify that it's cheaper to get the people on the invention and buy it when it's successful, or is it by chance?
Well, if you're a social scientist, almost nothing that big is by chance, right? So, but cause and effect are difficult to. They certainly happen together, right? In a sense. When I was a graduate student at Stanford, it was shortly after the biotech revolution had started. So Amgen was 79, I started in 86. Not Amgen, Genentech was 79, I started in 86. And there was this big question of why were there these independent things that were doing research, and would these things become pharmaceutical companies? And my instinct then and my instinct now is no. This was the efficient way to organize the innovation process. That the reason we have startups is because they are the more efficient. I'm not telling you the mechanism, but I'm telling you the end result in sort of economic terms. That's the efficient outcome. That's the way research should be organized. The innovation process should be organized. Efficient in the economist sense of the word. That this creates the biggest joint surplus. That then you can figure out how to divide it. But this is, if you wanted to maximize social welfare, this is the right way to do it. And I'm still enough of an economist that I think there's a big force that leads us towards, if you let the market be, we'll start moving towards the efficient outcomes.
In what way is having small startups do all the basic research more efficient? Isn't there a certain amount of overhead in starting up and shutting down?
That's a great point. So I don't think startups are actually doing research. So if you look at what they're doing, they are the intermediate vehicle for taking university research and figuring out commercial application of that. Right? When the startup started, a lot of them were in fact doing research, Now, if you are a VC and somebody comes to you and say, please invest, and you say, okay, what's the product? You say, no, I'm going to do research. And then, and if you're a VC fund, you're looking at a 5-year exit, and you say, when is this going to happen, right? So in this ecosystem, I cannot see startups really doing much research except that which is absolutely essential. And this is a challenge for the biomedical sphere, is because the exits are so long, it takes so long to get there. So I don't think, but, okay, let me see this.
I think it's too complicated to generalize because you have different industries, different technologies.
Right.
For example, in the pharmaceutical industry, you have the phase 1, phase 2.
Right.
And many startups are going now, let's say, to phase 2 and
Right.
then being sold to the veteran.
Right.
They're not trying to go to phase 3, they cannot, they don't have the resources.
Right.
Then you have completely different industries, all the disruptive new industries.
Right.
That you can, I mean, for example, in fintech,
Yes.
or you take Uber, you can't sell it to yellow cabs or to any, the existing companies. It's completely
Yes. No,
different.
you're absolutely right. One has to overgeneralize to then start saying, well, wait a minute, things are more complicated. But ask yourself, why are biotechs taking it into phase 2? Why?
You can get the funding.
I know,
for phase
but
1.
why is it efficient to fund them to do phase 1s? Why are they the appropriate place to do human trials?
No, human trials is already will be phase.
No, phase 1 is safety, and phase 2 is efficacy and pharmacokinetics and all that kind of stuff.
Takes $5 million, $10 million.
It doesn't matter. Why are they the right place to do it? Pharmaceutical companies have been managing that process really well. If you talk to pharmaceutical buyers, they'll tell you that the biotechs who do phase 2, 2.1, they'll do the 2.A or 2.B, and they've not had enough power in their tests.
No, you're right. They're willing to pay a premium, and they will allow 9 out of 10 to fail.
Right.
Outside of the research labs, and they will take the 10
Right.
if successful.
Yeah.
And
Well,
pay a premium. For them, it's more efficient.
it's certainly more efficient, and that tells you something about their internal dysfunction. Why pharmaceutical companies are not able to manage the development process. Because this is development, right? Often stage 3 is outsourced to contract research organizations. It's really an interesting question about why companies are able to do this, or why they're doing this. I was talking to companies, and they say when they buy the biotech, they will have to redo the phase 2 trials because their trials, the biotech is underpowered. And by the way, if you look at failures, biotechs and pharmaceutical companies fail at about the same rate, but biotechs fail late. Conditional on failure, the share of late failures in biotech is much higher, which leads me to infer that they are not an efficient vehicle for doing this, even after you control for selection. So, as I said, I think this is an interesting challenge. People are still trying to figure out how to deal with this new system. But I take your point that this is a much more complicated process than I at first blush. Shay?
I have a comment and a question. The comment is there are many different setups where the institutions are missing or underdeveloped, and then you have corporations internalize the public provision of the public good because nobody else will do it, and
Right.
they are big enough, like training labor
Right.
or other things. So that makes sense to me. The part I did not understand is what were the institutional changes that generated this market for technology, right? So it's not the universities that become stronger or more efficient or whatever, but the institutions of this market, property rights,
Well,
I think they all
so-
they are equal.
Yeah, so big change in property rights. I don't know what happened on the financing side. 82 was the Court of Appeals of the Federal Circuit, was formed to hear appeals from the district courts and patents. And 80 was Diamond v. Chakrabarti, which allowed the patenting of life forms, without which the biotech industry would not have happened. So on the IP side, there's that. I don't know whether there were big changes. You can tell me.
VC industry,
Yeah, whether there's something.
with this prudent man or whatever it's called when it was repealed in the late 70s.
Well, so the timing lines up. The timing lines up. And also, I mean, basically corporate dissatisfaction. If you read the histories of companies that did research, so the one that's most familiar to me is DuPont, and you can clearly see it in the management, you know, their memoranda and meetings. They're frustrated that they're not able to get the next nylon from their research labs, and they try all kinds of things. And so, you know, you have both on the supply side, going back to the question on why startups now. On the supply side, you have these institutional changes. On the demand side, companies are pulling back.
It's worth mentioning, there is this book, Creating the Market University, How Academic Science Became an Economic Engine. It tells the shift, the story of the shift of American universities from 30 years ago, where they looked down on applied science, to now that they are engaging in even commercializing.
Oh, it's worse than that. So I sit on Duke's promotion and tenure committee. All the cases go through us. And there's a proposal. How should we deal with startups? Should we count that? How should we count that in the person's package?
How to account for patents?
Sorry?
With the patents of publication.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so
now count patents as
we still don't count patents. We look at it and we say, oh, it's good, this person has X. But we don't count them in the way, you know, there's no H index, there's no Google's citation index for patents. But we could develop that. So far we haven't. But this, yeah, I mean.
The UK government pushes the universities to do that.
Yes, and
the system there is broken.
That's not broken at all.
But look, I mean, the reason universities are good at this is because we don't do that. The more you make us start doing that, the less we'll just become bad companies. And then we'll say, hey, you professor of English, what are you doing for us? What have you done for my business model lately? And there we go. Right?
It is happening, you know, in humanities.
I understand. It's not, but the wish should not be father to the thought, as Schumpeter said. You know, this is not something we should want. The fact that it's happening is something we should resist.
Okay,
Yes.
thanks again.
Okay, that was one more.
Okay, sorry.
You have the last word then.
You showed that like history repeats itself in terms of independent inventions. So do you think that there could be like a major world event that would make the firms to go back into like in-house research?
I was afraid somebody would ask that one.
I told you we should conclude.
I know. Thank you. I don't know no, I have no idea. I don't know how to think about that one. Do you have thoughts?
I don't know, maybe governments, policies, or I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, if the universities become less good or more competitive with companies will decide not to cooperate with us, not to give us money. And anyway, there's a whole different talk on the business model of universities, but that's not for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Since this is